Welcome everyone, both in person and virtually, to this third session in the room one of the DuPont Summit. We are here to talk about considerations on the cyber war in Ukraine. And I want to give a warm welcome to our two distinguished speakers this morning, Brandon Valeriano and Ardian Shafkovsky. Both of you, each of you have half an hour to talk to us about your topics, and then we will have 10 more minutes at the end to answer Q&As or just engage in the conversation. And of course, if you want to give more time to the conversation, that's perfectly fine. And that will be it on my side. So welcome and enjoy.
Mauricio. So I'm just going to go ahead and start. So welcome, everybody. My name is Ardian Shaikovsky, and I'm a director of the American Counterterrorism Targeting and Resilience Institute. So the point of my presentation today will be to talk about the sort of the landscape as far as the information that comes in and out of Ukraine related to Russian-Ukrainian war. I'll try to bring up some examples and as to how we perceive, at least in terms of the data that we collect on that, how the misinformation takes place or occurs online as well. This topic is very dear to me as well. I've been visiting Ukraine since February. I've been 3-4 times looking at the sort of the military aspect of what's happening on the ground, but also the counter messaging and the messaging space as to how the war words, if you will, is being fought in Ukraine as well. So let's see if we can. Yep, you may have to initiate. Apologize for a second. I'm utilizing. You should start once you activate that. Yes. Awesome. So when we talk about digital battlefield trends happening within the Russian and Ukrainian arena, if you will, we're not necessarily talking about new developments. So obviously, cyber attacks and hacking have been happening between the Russia and Ukraine for quite some time now. The attack within the IT infrastructure, the websites coming across from both countries have been happening for quite significant time. Encryptions and security communications attempts at both within the Ukrainian and Russian conflict as well. Psychological operations, obviously, the campaigns designed to instill fear, saw fear, intimidation within the respective armies. Again, it's not necessarily a new thing. We've been seeing that for so many years now. Obviously, distributed denial of service, access denial when it comes to certain websites and certain platforms that are utilized by both countries. As obviously the war has turned out in the digital space, we are also seeing attempts at use of artificial intelligence and machine learning to better learn again from the available data when it comes to the conflict, but also leverage that data for operation and other purposes as well. Social media manipulation, obviously, we're talking about how do mainstream social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, to those that are more encrypted, like Telegrams and others, small, mid-sized, large, and anything between, being exploited again by both parties, again, when it comes to turning and utilizing their messages as well. Obviously, when we talk about the Russian disinformation space, we are talking about a relatively large topic, right? This is, who are the players within this space as well. Obviously, we're talking about civilian, domestic, and military foreign and intelligence organizations who have, links to the again Russian intelligence community. For example, if you look at the Inforus, that is a news agency, right? That has significant ties to GRU. If we look at the all these other platforms, obviously they do in some capacity host bloggers, independent contributors, political analysts, whom again are being controlled by the Kremlin agenda in many ways as well. These are more of I would say, international contributions that come and contribute to the disinformation space, or in the disinformation space within the Ukraine and Russian conflict as well. You know, we have outlets that operate out of the United States. If you look at the USA, really, you have Al Jamahiriya in Libya. You have many others as well. So again, this acts as more of a Trojan horses, right, when it comes to spreading disinformation within that space as well. Then we're talking about Russian oligarchs. Obviously, Yevgeny Prigozhin is the founder of the Wagner Group and many other, right? So we could see, if you look at the link to the left, we'll see that USA, really, Al Jamahiriya, Cameroon, and others have some kind of, if not directly, at least indirect ties to some of the other Patriot Media Group and others sponsored by the, again, oligarchs in the space as well. So what has become more obvious to layman eyes, to layman observers of the situation? Obviously, we have Russian overt media, the RT. You know, I recently came back from Europe. Obviously, in Europe, it is restricted. We don't have access to that. But in the United States, I do frequently visit this website to look for the information and what's happening in that space. Rapidly in Germany, and you know, there's some other examples that are mentioned here as well. And then we have this new, I would say, umbrella of disinformation accounts that happen on, again, as I mentioned, on Telegram and other social media platforms, where we have pseudo or so-called analysts spewing disinformation on behalf of the Kremlin, or on behalf of the Russian organization as well. So, you know, if you look at the Kremlin amplifiers, obviously the Zero Hedge, Russia Insider, those are based in Bulgaria, Russia. We have some operating out of Serbia as well, that again do act as Kremlin amplifiers via blogs, websites, or any kind of platforms that they put out there within that social media space as well. So when we talk again, what are some of the manifestations again of the disinformation, digital disinformation happening online? What we have seen in our line of work is that we have, again, real accounts, but we do also have a lot bot-run accounts that continuously comment, post, share content online, that again makes it very difficult to differentiate it from the accounts that are actually run by real humans versus not run from real humans as well. There's some research that was conducted leading up to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia in February, that anywhere between 20 to 35 accounts on Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms were actually not authentic, where they're bot run. They were not human led in many ways as well. It's interesting that something that we also see in our line of work is that Internet Research Agency obviously is the Kremlin run disinformation entity that also sometimes, if you look at, for example, if you look at certain accounts during weekend, we'll see they're not necessarily as active or as present compared to others days, which also again tells us that it's very consistent with a schedule that's normally run by IRA and similarly oriented entities that operate in this space as well. Trolls, obviously, we have learned about trolls in some capacity as well, and they have become more personalized trolling in the sense that they are able to better gather insight about personal accounts, about personal users, and engage them at a more personal level as well. Similar to the bots that I mentioned earlier, we do have those that are human controlled, and we also have those automated accounts that are operated as well. Obviously, we have anonymous accounts versus artificially generated accounts as well that again do pose significant challenges that when it comes to collecting and dealing with that kind of data. I'll be more than glad to get into more details if you want to know about those more specifics as well. When we talk about social media platforms, obviously all social media platforms have become subject to disinformation exploitation when it comes to the Kremlin. But the ones that we are mostly focused on, that where we collect data from, are those that we believe to be more encryptive in nature. Obviously, Telegram is a larger platform, but we also have other, I would say, less popular for, I would say more popular for certain demographics platforms such as TikTok. We know that TikTok attracts certain younger demographics. We know that individuals, especially those, the younger demographics, talking about ages 12, 13, 14, 15, they're less educated in contentious social, economic, political issues. They do not necessarily, know how to react best when it comes to content that may be considered controversial. They cannot, they're not able to authenticate. There's a lot of impulsive reactions involved again when somebody, let's say, views the content that portrays a war, let's say, in Ukraine. So again, the emotional aspect of that is very important and plays into, again, the decision-making process of Kremlin and then similarly oriented entities when it comes to engaging with users in platforms such as TikTok, as I mentioned earlier. So a few things to have into account. I made a few demonstrations here for us to look at. This is an example of a website. I would say the Telegram channel, but they also do have their own website as well that is widely circulated online. It's a really important source of Russian disinformation and that happens on the Telegram space. They do have a website. They do also, again, most of the articles that are posted in this specific Telegram channels, they do come from, they're in English and Russian language. They also do have, again, entities, they act as amplifiers within this Telegram space. So we're talking about analysts, we're talking about individuals who are paid by the Kremlin, Russian's foreign ministry. So there's others as well. So this is a sample data that I put out there utilizing TJ-STED that we utilize on partially when it comes to looking at data analytics of these platforms as well. So obviously you could see this specific Telegram channel has 157,000 average reach posts, which is significantly high. You could see other them again. We don't need to necessarily get into the details, but it does show how important this Telegram channel has become, again, when it comes to propagating, when it comes to disseminating content there as well. So this is another example to kind of, if you look at on the bottom, we have about 7,585 channels that have mentioned these specific Telegram channels. And, in terms of the share, we're talking about thousands that repeat or amplify the messages or the content articles that are being shared in this specific Telegram channel as well. For those of you, again, who might be interested to find out a little bit more, you want to know, more in terms of data analytics about these specific Telegram channels and others, you're welcome to, ask me more direct questions as well. But again, this is one of the ways to kind of give us a glimpse again into the specific Telegram channel in some way as well. So how does the disinformation, how does the disinformation manifest online? So we have teamed up with some organizations that are really good at tracking digital disinformation. So we go and collect big data as well out there. And also we try to make sense of, again, the kind of data that is being put out there. What are the things we should be looking at? What are the features of that disinformation content as well? So these are a few examples that I would mention as well. So if you look at this side, there's obviously a flag that has the militant jihadi kind of encryption in there. It's in Arabic and it shows Ukrainian soldiers behind. So we ran the picture in our platforms. These are some of the techniques, again, that our partners utilize in looking at the picture as well. So obviously, the picture compression, again, we don't need to get into the details as well, shows that the picture is not authentic. It does show that the specific language within the specific script within that flag has been removed. We also ran, social network analysis. We could, very easily tell how and where within this Telegram space, the picture had circulated as well. So if you look at again, I'm going to rerun it again because the video is running kind of fast. In the other picture, you'll see that there's another picture that we would not necessarily consider that to be a disinformation, but is a very misleading information. We have a picture that was circulated again and shared by many of them, including my colleagues who do work in the counterterrorism space. I would say unwillingly, but also did not know, again, the nature of the content as well. This is a picture that shows a crowd of individuals praying what appears to be downtown Kiev, obviously, and that the circle again was circulated as Ukrainian Christians praying for Ukraine war. So what we did is we utilized the same techniques through our partner platform to try to make sense of what's happening with this exact picture. Obviously, we did run the JPEG ghost image analysis. Our partners ran it. Obviously, the picture does not show any manipulation within the picture space. And then we looked at the chronology of the image. Where was this article published first? So we came to a realization that the article was first published actually in 2019, and this is the original source of the article as well. So what it tells us that, again, the picture was misleadingly shared on social media platform, and also attributed to the current ongoing Russian-Ukrainian conflict, when it wasn't necessarily the fact as we know that right now. So again, these are some of the techniques that we try to utilize to, again, try to make sense of, you know, the content that's out there and what could be done best as well. So as I said earlier, we have partnered out with some organizations that, including ourselves, that we do track big data, but we also try to index any kind of telegram, any kind of channel that does disseminate or propagate any kind of disinformation online, and it's in our database, and then we run that sometimes on a daily basis to see the content. And again, we're also interested in social network analysis. So this is a very, again, brief demonstration of how, you know, data collection process looks like. Obviously, Telegram would be one example. We do engage human agents, meaning our own analysts, you know, let's say, hooking up or linking to the API within the Telegram space, that we set up a certain buzzword, keywords that we need the data to collect for us. And then again, we transfer that into our data set, turns into text data. And obviously we analyze utilizing natural language processing, or even put up alerts if we need to, again, trace certain content that's out there as well. And more importantly, we also we rely a lot on social network analysis. So obviously it's very important for us to not only trace individual Telegram accounts, but also amplifiers, or the important users within the Telegram space that, you know, may serve as amplifiers, that they have powerful voice, if you will, within that disinformation space. And that gives us a better sense of what certain accounts we should be focusing on, and, you know, what better ways to kind of collect the data, again, that it relates to the disinformation space as well. Obviously, and I'll be more than glad to answer if you have any more technical questions, but, you know, what we know now is that governments and social media companies are doing a better job at building their prevention capacities, and also building this sort of long-term resilience when it comes to fighting disinformation online. But as also our previous interlocutors very rightly pointed out, the digital space, or the online media space, is a very fluid space. Technology changes overnight. Sometimes we have to keep up with this sort of ever-changing technology that happens almost, again, on a daily basis. So we could, again, be responsive to those, again, as I said, technological transformations that happen almost on a daily basis as well. So I will stop at this juncture, and I will have my colleague continue, and we're more than glad to answer other questions.
Great, thank you.
This is mine, but you can. I don't know if it's
Well, you can borrow it, please.
Absolutely.
Can you switch over the? Thank you. Well, that was a great presentation, Adrian. I have a few questions, and I have questions because I'm starting to collect information operations data. And I think it's an important step in this field. So, let me use the mic. It's an important step in this field, and I've been worried for too long of the like war people in this kind of discipline, where they promote this idea that information operations are happening, but they don't tell us the content or the context. Yes, that's it. But I am the cyber war guy. I don't want to be the cyber war guy. I became the cyber war guy. I don't know how this happened. It's a question for me and my therapist. But I've been doing cyber war and cyber conflict for about 12, 14 years now. I don't even know at this point. And for a long time, I've been the one who's kind of promoted the idea of collecting data on cybersecurity incidents to understand the domain, to understand what's happening, to understand the operations that are going on. In some ways to counter hype-based perspectives, in some ways to counter the kind of obvious preference for single examples to kind of illustrate the field. And that's very problematic from a number of fronts. But regardless, I'm going to do everything that I tell people not to do here. I'm going to go the complete opposite direction, because I'm going to go deep in one case. Because frankly, I'm tired of what the discourse says about cyber war. It's blatantly a rejection of reality. It's blatantly a rejection of everything, every leader, every DoD person, every classified transmission that we know suggests the complete opposite is happening from the discourse. And that's a problem because the way we talk about cyber war, the way we mythologize cyber war does not actually match how cyber conflict is fought. How do I know? I teach the people who fight cyber war, and yet people still are like, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's out of control. I'm just tired of it. It is a good example of Carter and Black in Foreign Affairs. They say Russian cyber attacks on the government and military command and control centers, logistics and energy services, emergency services, and other critical services, such as border control stations, were entirely consistent with a so-called Thunder One strategy intended to stoke chaos, confusion, uncertainty, and ultimately avoid a costly and protracted war in Ukraine. They wrote this in April. War started in February. This is the dream of the cyber war, folks. This idea of a cyber thunder run. A thunder run's a old military strategy going from Vietnam. This idea that you expand ammunition and you rush in to distract and disable the aggressors, the defenders, so you can walk in. It's a more prevalent strategy during the Persian Gulf War, and it's become this sort of mythical idea in cyber war. Actually very often mimicking the great historical source Battlestar Galactica, the second version, where the Cylons disabled all the Battlestars because they were networked, and there was a thunder run and they took over the Earth and everyone died. That's kind of what they're suggesting here. That's what they're suggesting here in Foreign Affairs. Other pundits have said there's shock and awe. That was by RAND scholars. Jason Healy out of Columbia says a Russian invasion of Ukraine may redefine how we think about cyber conflict, because it's going to be the first time a state with real cyber capabilities is willing to take risks and put it all on the line. I guess he's suggesting the United States either doesn't have real cyber capabilities or isn't willing to really put it all on the line during the last few wars we've had. I don't know what he's suggesting there, but this idea is that this is the real test case. If our dreams of cyber war are going to be fulfilled, they're going to be filled here. If our case can't make it here, it can't make it anywhere. What do? We review the war at a 6-month mark. We have a very specific reason we do it on the 6-month mark. And we evaluate the impact of cyber operations in the course of the war. We look at severity. We examine the style and purpose of these attacks. This debate speaks to core theories and assumptions about the future of war and the power of emergent technology. That's just an outline. Cyber strategies, just for a little description. I have a 2018 Oxford book where we kind of distinguish between 3 types of cyber strategies: disruption, which is basically harassment, espionage or intelligence, and degradation, which is seeking to destroy or damage the opposition. It's entirely possible to empirically examine cyber operations. It doesn't mean it's easy, but there is this kind of myth that you can't empirically examine covert operations. The problem with covert operations is they're not declared. But most of the conflict that's happened since World War II is not necessarily declared anyways. So it just makes it tougher. What do we know about Russia's cyber profile? From our data set, the DCID, which is cited at the bottom, we have a new version coming out in Cyber Defense Review. So we're on version 2.0. But looking at Russia's cyber profile from 2000 to 2020, it's frequently the initiator. It's very rarely the target. I think it was like the target twice. Let me look that up. Most cyber incidents are launched for disruption or espionage purposes. They're more of a nuisance than a degrading actor. The United States is the one who actually uses most degrading strategies. Cyber incidents are not often severe. They have never resulted in concessions. In our data set, there are only 8 cyber concessions, I believe. None of them are invoked by Russia. Private sector actors and government local authorities are more frequently the target than military actors. Nearly 1/3 of the incidents sought to communicate or manipulate the reception of digital information for malicious purposes. So information operations and the connection to cyber operations is deep and enduring, and it's often a Russian strategy. Where did the data come from? If you know my work in the past, you know the DCID data set, we use a very specific data collection method. I threw it out the window here to make a tough case for ourselves. Basically, if you can't find cyber war using this data, you're not going to find it ever. We use the SSSCIP weekly state reports. These are the Ukrainian Cyber, Institute, whatever, the Ukrainian cyber group that was stood up to protect Ukraine. Victor Zhorka was the chief, I believe. They released weekly reports from March 3rd, 2022 to May 15th. They stopped. Actually, I need to figure out why they stopped, but I can guess. The main reason, of course, is this was to promote the need to protect and help Ukraine, which obviously everyone's behind. I support Ukraine. Everyone, most people support Ukraine. But the idea of cyber war never really emerged. So they kind of stopped tracking at a weekly basis, and they released more macro reports after that point. Anyways, that's good for us because we have very detailed weekly reports, at least until May. And then you have two big reports from Microsoft, April and June. Microsoft has done a heroic effort to defend Ukraine. Unfortunately, the Microsoft reports represent this kind of millennial trend to be the main central character in every story. They want to be the main central character in this war. They want to be the ones protecting the Ukrainian people. And they've done a great job, but they kind of make it out to be more than they need to. In any case, it's a good data source. So I'm using that data source. So using those two data sources, we have 47 cyber incidents between, I think it's November of 2021 up until May of 2022. I'll skip the hypothesis, but that's a lot. That's a lot compared to the past. 2000, 2013, there was only 3. The first phase of the war in Ukraine, the Crimean phase, 2014 to 2020, you have 25. You have 47 and 22 alone. That is a dramatic uptick in cyber activity. But what does that mean? That's the real question. You can throw around these numbers any way you want, but you actually have to deconstruct and decompose them in some ways. And here we have a severity index that comes from the DCID data set. It's between 0 and 10. Between 2014 and 2020, the severity is 3.24. During 2022, the severity actually declines, that we actually see less severe cyber incidents. And if you read the reports, and if you read the threat intelligence, that is the through line, that the actual attacks have been less prolific, less innovative. They repurpose malware. It's not at all what people expected. They're less severe. I'll show you some other data here. But this is severity. Severity over time. What's interesting about the first one is you see an uptick, of course, not necessarily in 2014, but more so I identify 2016, 2017. That's when you saw the energy attacks in Ukraine. You see an uptick in severity around then. Looking at 2022, I mean, it's tough to say because it's a more compressed timeline, but there's no clear pattern. There's no clear regression. I had some heart problems a few years ago. That looks like my heart monitor. It's not a consistent pattern. You can't really interpret anything from that. Looking at the style, the strategies, you would expect during war, Russia would shift towards more degradative strategies to impact the opposition. But you see from 2000 to 2020, espionage has the most of the pie. But when you go to 2022, disruption gets most of the pie. Espionage rightly declines because you're in war, and espionage and intelligence is important, but long-term espionage kind of goes out the window. So that's about half the attacks. So it makes sense, but you would expect hypothetically that degrade incidents would increase. And you don't even really see much of a change. Actually, degrade decreases between the prior phase to the current phase. Targets. In war, you would expect a shift in targets. During the 2020, the main target, of course, is private non-state actors, government, military, government, non-military is green, yellow is government. You don't see a change at all during 2022. There is no shift at all, really. The focus still remains on the private sector. Coordination. Microsoft makes a lot of coordination between conventional and cyber forces. The problem is Microsoft doesn't tell you how many total cyber incidents there are. They actually kind of report a lot more than we report because we have a different method. We code cyber operations, not cyber incidents. There are many incidents that can make up an operation. Operations are bound by target and time. So we find that 7 of the 47 represent multi-domain operations where there's a combination between conventional and cyber forces at the same time. So that's 15%. Is that a lot? Really, the question would be comparing between other phases, and I don't have that data, but surface check, I would say it's not a lot. Microsoft themselves lists 6 to 7 incidents. So independently, we code 7. So there's a confluence between the two sides, but really it's about putting this data in proportion. Information operations, that maintains actually that decreases in some ways, but I'm not so sure if that's significant. Between 2000 and 2020, there is a connection. 29% of the cyber incidents that Russia launches are connected to an information operation. During 2022, only 19%. But that's one of the questions I have for Adrian here is about Telegram, and we don't really code Telegram. I don't understand the Telegram of it all, so that's kind of the water's edge for me. But as far as the data that we have now, we actually see a decrease. I'm not so sure that matters, but it's interesting nonetheless. So conclusions. We find that while there is an increase in cyber operations during the war, we do not observe an increase in concessions, severity, or a difference in targets or methods of access. We find little evidence of coordination. The central fact remains, and this fact has been known for academics in the security study space for a long time, and people working with the military, that cyber operations do not dramatically aid in the undertaking of military, diplomatic, or espionage operations in the context of war. That leads to the whole question of what is cyber for? I can spend hours talking about that. I think cyber is a better use case for the state versus the individual, not state versus state. But that's a whole other book I need to write. Those who argue, though, for the massive transformation or revolution that they must confront the evidence and reality. A lot of people are making careers out of this idea of a transformation or a revolution in military affairs. It's not the case here. I think it's more likely in the case of information operations, but it's definitely not working in AI. It's definitely not working in cyber. Even in the idea of battle networks, that's kind of the water's edge in some ways. And that's not what people talk about because that's more complex. The remaining question, though, is why? Why do we have this result? There are many reasons, possibly. Could be that Ukraine's very good at the defense. It could be that America is just right back there with the Ukrainians, helping them succeed. It could be partners and allies like NATO partners. It could be that Russia just sucks at all this. And it could be that everyone's just been lying to us, and all these pundits that are telling us that Russia was going to take Kiev in 60 days were entirely wrong. Probably. Yeah. That's the thing is like, there's also bureaucratic problems. There's also this idea that maybe Putin didn't tell the cyber operators to plan for a cyber war. There's a lot of reasons why. I don't think there's going to be one single reason why. I think there's going to be a confluence of things, but I leave that for other people. I leave that for grad students. I leave that for people emerging in the field to think more about the why. I'm telling you the how and the data. I'm telling you the what. And the what is, if you read Foreign Affairs, you read War on the Rocks, you read these pundits, you read the RAND scholars, you read the think tank people, they're almost entirely and utterly wrong. And as an academic, I don't even know where they come from. I don't know what gives them the basis to actually make the claims they make. The majority of people I run into in cybersecurity are utter charlatans, utter snake oil salesmen. And they don't do the data because the data is hard. They don't do the research because the research is hard. And it is hard. It's difficult. My life would be a lot easier if I were just going to say, cyber war changes everything. It's a revolution in military affairs, but that's not socially, it's not accurate from a social science perspective. And I want to encourage better research. And I want to encourage us to think a little bit better about what cyber is good for. And I don't think it's good for war. And I think if it can't make this case, I don't know what case it's going to make. There's maybe this mythical future war where it's all going to work out. But, I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm fairly convinced that this sort of combination, coordination, complementarity between cyber and conventional war. Ideas I've even promoted, they're becoming less and less a reality over time. So that's it for me.
Your data starts in April 2022, what's
May.
been happening since then?
Not much of anything, actually. I mean, it's still the continuation of the same thing, but you're not seeing dramatic energy attacks. You're not seeing dramatic attacks on communications and command and control facilities. You're seeing a rise in electronic warfare, counter drone warfare, and that's interesting. But you're not really seeing a rise in cyber operations. But I don't really have the data on that because your crate is not producing the weekly reports because the weekly reports aren't as rich as they once were in the beginning. So the other thing is there are a lot of threat intelligence reports written by the cybersecurity community. And if you kind of put them all together and like put them in a macro perspective, you start to see the patterns. But when you look like at a very narrow case, you know, you can kind of like sky is falling and stuff like that. But when you put it all together, it kind of seems a little different. But that's just my perspective.
Just one comment I made, great presentation. So we just want to kind of attest to the difficulties in analyzing, as you said, secondary sources or secondary sources of data sometimes, especially when it comes to different criteria as to what kind of criteria that this one entity utilizes when it comes to reporting certain data. It makes it very complicated for us when it comes to analyzing the data set and operating in the space of, again, analyzing mostly secondary data. It's a real headache from our standpoint as well.
And it's tough to trust like the threat intelligence data that comes from the cyber, whatever you call it, cyber companies. Because, and I said this too, if you look at the articles, if you look at the New York Times, you look at Newsweek, they're quoting people who work for cyber threat intelligence. That's like asking Northrop Grumman, like, is a F-22 like good for you? It doesn't make a lot of sense, but really got to think about this kind of incestuous nature of who we ask for advice in this space. And some people are going to make a lot out of things because they make a lot of money out of this data. And the question is really, when you put it all together in a macro sense, the picture kind of changes quite a bit. I want to ask you though about the Telegram. I don't understand it. I'm not on Telegram. I'm scared of Telegram because I work with government. I use Signal and WhatsApp, and as far as I know, I mean, I've probably run over this, but I don't see this social networking function for Signal and WhatsApp. How does that work in Telegram? And like, how can you analyze the impact like we do with Twitter? Like, you can look at impressions, you can look at reach, you can look at retweets. How do you look at the impact of Telegram as it works as a social network, like compared to Twitter? That's really the question.
It's a very good question. So obviously, we get to the crux of the problem, and we really identify accounts that are be considered or deemed to be really dangerous in terms of spreading propaganda. Then we believe we have achieved some kind of goal, right? Some kind of objective there. But sometimes we, I would say in most of the cases we do operate with bits and pieces of information. A smaller accounts, that circulate, certain information that would be considered as public safety security concern as well. So the example that I showed out there, they're hiding in the plain sight, right? And they have close to 1 million subscribers, and everybody can get access. It's easy to access to, but they do amplify a lot of messages that make sense to us again when it comes to getting or generalizing things to certain themes and what's happening in the disinformation space. But what we're also interested in looking at the accounts that operate more underground. So that's where we tap into the groups, we tap into the channels. Most of these channels and groups are actually run by administrators. Actually, you have to get access before you get into those channels. So that's where a lot of activity will happens as well. We're not lucky always. I've followed militant jihadi groups for many years, and done psyops and counter messaging online in Iraq and other places as well. So we had significant access to militant jihadi groups because again the data were more available. They're very prolific when it comes to spreading accounts and disseminating accounts as well. With the Russian equation now, obviously there's some channels that are again hiding in the plain sight, but most, again, important channels, I would say, in terms of our data collection and how to utilize those secret, if you will, channels and groups as well, which is again difficult to get.
But isn't that counter to the idea of information operation?
Yeah.
Secret, like, you know, people don't tell them what have you know, if they will not restrict it. How do you untangle that?
Stuff.
That's why I avoid Telegram, because I just don't understand the impact, you know, if everything's secret, then I don't get it.
The Telegram, I think it's also, you know, it also depends on the user based logic. If they believe it's because it's encrypted platform that they could, you know, very easily circulate information and spread it. Some platforms are more popular than others, right? So the more popular they are, the more engagement, the more people tend to flock to those, and the more conversations happen as a result. So that's where we kind of tap into, okay, what are the things? What are the basic patterns of things we should be looking at?
Can you measure how Telegram leads out into the real world? Is there a way to do that?
There's some studies that we, you know, look at again the offline versus online kind of effect. There's some studies that some research again that we have conducted, not necessarily within the digital disinformation space in Russia, in Ukraine, but in looking at far right groups as well. Again, I would say it's anecdotal at best as well. You know, we can understand user behavior online, but that's all we understand. It's user behavior online. That could be totally different from an individual, let's say, when it passes into the real life as well, which I mean, people stand on social media platforms for different reasons. Some want engagement, some want interactions, some have more of an infatuation with content, and just they stick with and they don't do nothing with that. Yeah. So it's a really tricky thing.
I can add in here, being from that side of the world originally, there is a cultural aspect that is very important. There is a lot of debates on who is right, who is wrong. So people are just have so many options that they even don't know what the truth is. And then there was this way of, okay, if you go on Telegram, there are particular channels that will be the truth that you're gonna get. So you don't have to listen to this 100 opinions. So it was a cultural wave that created, so these groups gained popularity mouth to mouth, rather like, don't listen to the media, don't do this, this is the Telegram that will tell you the truth. And this is something cultural that unfortunately, Eastern Europe have seen a lot, particularly after the Soviet Union collapsed, because there were so many opinions, people just did not know what to believe. So people over there, including my birth country, they still follow Telegram, and we're here like, what type of news you're looking at? And they're like, Telegram. So there's no traditional media, is no even social media that comes from America, because that's wrong too.
Yes.
So it's like you have your own trusted channel.
I do see an analogy though with like Fortran and Discord kind of being similar in that way. So especially with QAnon. Yeah, Discord's good. I use it for games and I don't want to leave my community. I don't know what's gonna happen with Discord.
Yeah. That's actually a great point, and this is what you know our partners and ourselves do sometimes. Again, obviously we look at the appeal of Telegram across different cultures, across different geographic locations. We have 20+ languages that we have to really cater to get to the topic as well. So it is an important aspect of looking as well. But even more importantly, Telegram, is just one, or I would say a subset of the equation. We try to make sense of the entire what we refer to as ecosystem of platforms as well, right? So obviously we can start a Telegram because the old social media platforms have become so interactive, and apps can be integrated within different social media platforms that we may start a Telegram and end up on Discord, or end up on Gab, or Yubo or Twitch, right? So it really depends. So looking at the general picture within the ecosystem of platforms, I think it's really important when it comes to making some sense of data, as our Mr. Bellarino was saying as well.
Do you see much cross contamination on the Chinese side in aiding the Russian information operations there?
Based on the sample that we have, we do see a lot of that kind of saturation of information happening. Also some information also coming from the Middle Eastern countries as well. I wouldn't say it's more impactful, but we do see the footprint as well in that sense as well. Although I would not, attest to the Chinese part, because check this information coming from from the channel, because we're not really focused on that. But we do see like some of the channels that we follow again. We look at, specific channels, but also, okay, who's sharing this channel, how is it shared, who are the amplifiers. So, once we engage into that kind of social network analysis, we occasionally, I would say more frequently, more recently tap into this channel that are really influenced from China and understand actors as well.
When I joined the DoD, we were told to take Line off of it. And then we were recently told to take TikTok off. And I wonder when they'll tell us to take the Telegram off. But I've never been. Any other questions from the audience?
On a more particular side, do you guys use any particular tools to maybe mine the data or process the data or?
Yeah, so there's a long history of that, right? And the dream is particularly for cyber or any emerging technology, we use machine learning to scrape. I can tell you, it's just too unwieldy, and there's too much noise. It's a very capable method. The problem is you're gonna need humans anyways. So then it just comes down to, do you want to just use humans in the first place, or do you want to use humans in the back end? So that's just kind of like, because you're gonna need to clean it, it's just like. And we were playing with it too for using cooperation data, cooperation and conflict data and events data sets. And we were laughing because my co-author came to us one day and he's like, "It's 140 boards from 2010 to 2020. We're like, no, there's not. So it's just a lot of noise in the data, and that's the problem. So what we have done, because we work with the government, we have access to the virtual student virtual service. Something like that. It's like a VIA, I don't know what it's called, but there is a virtual student internship program where you can apply to work with the Department of State, and they'll fund you to different government organizations. So my team working through the Naval Postgraduate School gets 20 interns per semester. And you lose a bunch of them because they're not really interested in it's all virtual. But usually we get about 12 to 14 that kind of persist, and some of them carry over from year to year. So we've been using that labor. At first, the DoD told me that they wouldn't help pay me to code this data because it's impossible. Then the next year, DoD Minerva cited my data as like the use case and the example for what they want to fund. So I don't know. It's a mess, but yeah, there have been grad students, particularly Ben Radford out of Duke, had a whole dissertation on machine learning for this event data. It just, like I said, it just becomes too unwieldy when the question is when you want to use students. I would love it to be automatic, but you're just doing a lot of noise and you have to clean it anyway. So the question is when you clean it. So.
Yeah, it's similar in our space as well. It's a very interactive process, but the human intelligence should be the centerpiece of the data collection and processing as well. We do have, I believe in the last slide I showed some of the, I would say less sophisticated data collection processing tools that we utilize when it comes to create bots, and we utilize some processing or coding languages out there as well to collect big data. But again, we have to seek through individually to make sure that data that we collect actually makes sense as far as our purpose on research. But we are partners as well. This is the tool that we utilize from them in doing engaging big data collection as well. So again, we have indexed, or they have indexed, or together we have indexed. It's somewhere close to 400 to 500,000 Telegram channels worldwide that in some capacity deal with military jihadi groups, far-right groups, left-wing groups, and most recent digital disinformation happening in Ukraine and Russia as well. But again, there's a learning curve, right? So it is helpful in terms of getting to initial selections when it comes to the channels or topic we're interested in. But again, it boils down to sifting through through human intelligence.
I'm starting to think like maybe kind of an amalgamation of your method where you have humans flag the Telegram channel, and then you have machine learning scrape it for sentiment, topic, and other sorts of things. But then the topic data is just going to get a little bit messed up. But I think that kind of method is probably easier, but you're still going to need an army of humans. Which is why when I would suggest that you're looking to do the information operations and IO kind of project to sadly kind of make it kind of narrow, to kind of bound yourself into a narrow time space. Because if you go too broad, it's gonna be a little bit less helpful than you may think it would be. And a good example would be the Jacob Shapiro article in JPR recently, where they produced an IO data set. I just don't know what to do with it because there's not a lot of helpful variables in that data set, so. Any other questions?
I guess I'm the most interested. Now from the research perspective, do you guys get any funding opportunities? Because there is so much funding on IoT and artificial intelligence, but this is such a narrow field.
Mhm.
So what is the opportunity for research? Because obviously we understood that humans need to work. So is there a specific funding from where to analyze
Well, I
this?
can talk for hours on this one. So I'm probably, I'm probably getting out of government because the problem is getting government to government money is nearly impossible. So they they use the term drug deals. Quite a bit, that you gotta do a drug deal from one agency to another, so it's very difficult to do that. But yes, the government's the prime source of funding. Whether that be the DoD, the Army Research, the Naval Research Group. The DoD Minerva is particularly important, net assessment, DITRA. These are all great sources. But getting access to them can be very complicated. And I was talking to the Navy Research, what they call the Navy Research Group. But I was talking to them and I was asking them why they don't advertise. And they just said that we just advertise to the people we've given grants before. So you see how the process kind of works. If you got a grant before, they're more likely to get another grant, but they don't spread it out. And of course, they don't, I don't know how the policy is among Americans, that's definitely a problem. NSF doesn't have a lot of money, so conventional sources of academic funding, there's not a lot of money there. More so in the UK. Actually, if I were to say, if you were to be a researcher in this space, I would say go to the UK because I review grants for the UK and I reject them all the time. It's horrible. So I think there's a lot more opportunity to work with ESRC or whatever they're renamed it now. Like that's a high level of interest. Foundations are another part. But like the Stantons of the world, the Smith Richardsons of the world, the traditional sources, they don't really care that much about cyber. And I know I'm not Cato, but I know CKI, the Koch Institute, doesn't care that much about cyber either. They probably care more about IO, but you can speak to that. Hewlett is very big on funding here, but they go in cycles and they have executive directors who leave and come back, and I don't really know what's going on with that. But I'm going to a workshop in San Diego next week that's funded by Hewlett, so that's a common funder. But you know, I think what's happening mostly is that, and I'm talking to a few universities right now, they're building these new NASA master's programs and cyber information, you know, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's really a way we need to start thinking about funding, is that funding through these new rising master's programs and using these rising master's programs as a source of research. So you disentangle yourself from the government or foundation, but there's not a lot of great money out there. And the problem is the money kind of moves 5 years behind the times. So, you know, that's like when you're at the edge, you know, you don't get a lot of money because you're at the edge because the funders are 70-year-old men who don't know what the edge is. So, you can speak to that.
I do echo with a lot of, important things to consider as well. So what we also see in these kind of, I would say it's a relatively niche field in many ways because we're still trying to understand a lot of things. So as long as we focus on creating a need also for funding, as opposed to just pursuing the existing grant out there. So I think, again, creating a need for something that we believe needs to be funded as well. I mean, we talked a lot today about, things that we do, but I'm sure there's a lot of limitations in what we do that could be further explored as a potential for funding as well as something that could be further explored as well in some capacity.
Another interesting aspect is I've seen particularly British academics still work for cyber threat intelligence companies. And there's other intelligence companies you can work for. And that's kind of a backdoor way to get access to data and get access to money because they have more money than the university sector. That's another way to do it. I will say the positive though is, publishers are hungry for this. Journals are hungry, publishers are hungry, I read the book series, you know, we want this work. And I also know, like, I just been on an interview and they want to hire. And they said that they didn't really get qualified women. I don't know if that's true, but that's what they told me. So I know that that's a big struggle, is the gender and ethnic diversity of the technology field is a huge problem. And I would encourage you to keep going, because these universities want to hire people like you guys. But they feel they don't have an opportunity. I don't know if that's wrong or right. But I'm hearing.
We are from the university side.
Yeah.
So, and we are looking outside.
Any other questions? Even phrases?
Well, I wish I had questions.
I like your article, I love it, it's good, I look forward to seeing more of it.
That was an intriguing talk, thank you.
Great, thank you so much.